All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. We're going to cover the listing agreement, which came out, I think, Wednesday morning last week is when we finally got it. So
yes, the day after doing stats when we presented everything
exactly,
else.
yes. So we got it the day after. It would have been nice to have it the day before, and here we go. So there's not a whole lot that's changed to it with the exception of just a couple of different places.
Yep.
But we're going to go ahead and go through the whole thing. We're not going to spend a ton of time on every single portion of it. We will spend a little bit more time on paragraphs 8 and 10 because those are the major changes. So Richard, take it away.
Yeah, the purpose of this is to give you a basic understanding of the listing agreement, not so that you can recite it line to line to your seller, but so that you understand that if they ask you a question, you know what the answer is.
Correct.
So I start with this exclusive right of sale listing agreement. This is available on Form Simplicity. It's available now. You've uploaded into DocuSign. You want to make sure you are using the right agreement. It is the ERS, and the new version is 20. TN. Now, TN is the transition to transaction brokerage. This is single agency with the transition built into it. Now, seller, simple enough. This is the name straight out of the tax records. So you're going to get a phone call from somebody to come and talk to them about listing their house. The first thing you're going to do is go into the county tax records, run the records, and whatever is on there is what goes onto that line. So if it's John Smith, you put John Smith. If it's John Smith and Mary Smith, that's what goes there.
And this is another reason why it's so important to do this is because if you see a name on there that you don't recognize you've already had a conversation with these people, you need to ask them immediately, who is this person who's also on title?
You will find circumstances where the parents have put a child, one of their kids, onto the deed. Well, they're on the deed, they need to sign the document as well. It needs to be all the names. Now, you'll also find usually two variances on there. One of them being, you're in South Florida, a lot of elderly people, they tend to put their properties into a trust for estate planning, tax planning purposes. Or you have investors who will buy properties in an LLC, 123 Main Street, LLC. Understand, both of those entities are inanimate objects.
They
cannot sign a document. An LLC can't sign a document. However, what you need to turn to both of those people and go, Bob, when we go to contract, not if, when we go to contract on your home, the title company will need to see the operating agreement for your LLC, or they'll need to see the trust documents for your trust. Can you provide those to me now so that we have them ready to go? That's how you'll verify what it is. Now, if it's an LLC, you would be signing it, Bob Kirschenbaum, President, 123 Main Street, LLC. That's how all documents will be signed. Okay? Broker, and this is something that they added, I'm not really sure why. This is not your name. This is Keller Williams Realty Consultants. This is the name of the office that you are in.
So if you're in Fort Lauderdale, Keller Williams Realty Professionals. If you're in Aventura, Keller Williams Realty Elite Properties, yes.
Each brokerage is an individual entity. It's the name of your office. Wherever you see broker on a document, it's the name of the office that you are in.
And it's never Richard's name.
It's no one's name other than the name of the company.
Correct.
Okay. Now, paragraph 1 is what gives us the authority to sell the property. A list date, a termination date. Other than putting in the day that you have the document signed, there are no rules, laws, guidelines for what the termination date is. It has been typical for as long as I remember. You use a 6-month listing agreement. If you're doing high-end properties, it's also been pretty typical to use a 1-year listing agreement. But the way I joke with people, I said, if you have a seller who wants to give you a 30-day listing agreement, I don't have a problem with that. as long as you're willing to list it at a 30-day price.
Correct.
What about 90 days?
Same thing.
Yeah.
You've got to look at the market, and if you were doing that 2 years ago, I have no problem giving you a 90-day listing because I knew if I put your property on the market, it's going to sell in a week. But if somebody's asking you for a 90-day listing, but they want to try and push the price point, you're probably going to have a listing that expires in 90 days.
Yeah, and that's why using that spreadsheet inside of our stats presentation will really help you with that. Because if you have somebody who says, hey, I only want to do a 30-day listing with you, you'll be able to show them, okay, well, here's what a 30-day list price is going to need to look like in order for us to accomplish your goal of getting your home sold in 30 days.
Okay.
And I kind of have the 90-day situation right now.
Yep. This is just learning the right scripts and dialogues, how to explain to them that 90 days is not really practical unless it is priced aggressively. And then you're going into our stats presentation as to how to price something properly.
Yeah, and there may be cases where, based upon the average days on market in the type of property you're in, you may need to ask for a 1-year listing agreement. Specifically in some of the condo price points that we have right now, unless they're willing to price it aggressively, they need to be prepared that it could be a 12-month agreement that they're going to need to sign in order to get their condo sold.
Throughout all the classes we teach, this is always my message to you. You are the professionals. You're a real estate licensee, but you are a professional at what you're doing. Do not let the seller or the buyer drive the boat. That's your job. You're consulting with them, telling them how things are going to work, how it's going to happen. This is what the reality is. If you give them all of these logical steps and they want to be illogical, you need to decide, do you really want to work with them or not?
Yeah.
So if you know that it's not being priced properly to sell within 90 days, you need to look at it and go, do you really want to waste 90 days worth of work and take that listing? You need to be prepared with the numbers to give them.
Just like the whole doctor situation, you wouldn't expect to go to your doctor and tell your doctor exactly what you need your doctor to do. You expect your doctor to tell you exactly what needs to happen in order to help you feel better.
Yep. All right, so question for you. You have a listing, and that listing agreement expires at the end of this month, and you just got a contract on it, but the contract's not closing until the middle of September. Do you need to have an extension signed for your listing agreement?
No, not really.
So we got a no, we got a yes, not really. We're shaking a head, yes. All right. This is where it's important to read and understand the documents you're having somebody signed, because the next line right here says, upon full execution of a contract for sale and purchase of the property, all rights and obligations of this agreement carry through until closing. Technically, no, you do not have to have an extension signed. However, the day that I present them with the contract to sign the contract, I would also be presenting them with a modification to listing agreement. That form is called MLA, modification to listing agreement, where I would extend the expiration date for probably 30 days past the closing date on the contract. Because you know there are a whole lot of contracts fall apart either because of appraisals or inspections. And if it falls apart after this has expired, you're SOL. You've lost the listing. If you've extended it, at least you've got a chance to try and get another contract slid into place so at the end of the day you get paid.
Correct.
All right? Now, the rest of this paragraph is basically dealing with the Fair Housing Act. And unfortunately, you will run up against somebody who one day you'll be sitting there talking to them and they say, you know what, I've lived in this neighborhood for 40 years, I love my neighbors, and I would just really appreciate it if you don't bring any green people to my house. And if that happens to you, you take your books and you close them and you go, I'm sorry, I am not the realtor to work with you on this. And they might very well turn around and say, oh, no, I just wanted to put it out there. It's okay, let's go on. Well, do you think you're ever going to provide them with an offer that their first question is not going to be, tell me about the buyers. Guys, it is illegal, and in my opinion, it is morally reprehensible. I don't want you working with those people.
It's not worth your license, and it's not worth your reputation.
Okay? And be aware of the fact that HUD employs mystery shoppers. And you might very well get a phone call one day from somebody who says, I just saw your listing on Zillow. Can you tell me what kind of people live in that neighborhood? Well, it's an interesting question, isn't it? Because what are they asking? I don't have a clue. So how you answer it will depend on whether you get to keep your license or not. My answer would be, well, as far as I know, really nice people. What can I tell you about the property? That line there is what determines if you break the law or not. You talk about the property, the features of the property, not the people it would apply to. You got that? Okay. The property has a phenomenal backyard, not great backyard for the kids to play, kids and pets to play in.
And while that is completely innocent, it is a violation of fair housing.
Yes. The property is not walking distance to a synagogue, because now you've broken both handicap and religion. However, the property can be close proximity to houses of worship. That's no different than close proximity to shopping, close proximity to highways or transportation. Keep it about the property, not who it applies to, and
Correct.
you'll be safe. All right. Street address, simple enough. That's the address you drove up to. Again, legal description, straight out of the tax records. That's your Plat A, Block B, Lot 14.
Yep.
Okay. The only time you would ever check see attachment, and we're in this office, if you were ever to pull up the tax records for this office, 3301 North University, it actually fills an entire 8.5 by 11 page. Those of you that have lived in Coral Springs for a long time, you know the history of this block. That's why. If that happens to you, check the box, see attachment A. On the top of the tax record, you write attachment A. They will initial that. It becomes part of your listing agreement. Personal property, including appliances. You should list everything that's going to convey with the property, except that's a really long list.
Can be, yes.
This, however, is your time to have a conversation with the sellers about what they're thinking should stay with the property. See, in some parts of the country, it's very typical that sellers will take the washer and dryer.
Texas was one of them.
Right? In other parts of the country, washers and dryers will always stay and convey with the property.
The refrigerator didn't go with you in Texas either.
You want to have that conversation, because the last thing you want is to show up the day of closing and do a walkthrough and the washer and dryer are gone, because who do you think is going to end up paying for it?
They're going to ask you for one.
Yeah. Have the conversation. You know, Mrs. Seller, as we walked through the house, I noticed that chandelier in the dining room, very unusual, which is a polite way of saying really ugly. Are you planning on leaving that? Oh, no. My in-laws gave that to us as a housewarming gift. Fabulous. Here's what I'd recommend. See, what I've always found is when a buyer walks into your house, falls in love with your house, they're going to fall in love with everything here. So I would suggest you and your husband go over to Home Depot or Lowe's this weekend, buy a chandelier that looks like it belongs, and let's switch it out now. You already know you're going to be taking it with you.
Correct.
Have those types of conversations right up front. Okay? Occupancy, it either is or is not currently occupied by a tenant. If it's a primary residence, you're always checking, is not. If it's an investment property and there's a tenant in there, not only are you checking is, you're putting in the date that the owner's telling you that the lease expires, but you want to ask for a copy of the lease.
Always ask for a copy of the lease.
That not only verifies when the expiration of the lease is, but it tells you what monies are being held for last and security. Because if If your closing is before the expiration of the lease, your buyer just inherited a tenant. And all of the monies that are being held need to transfer from the seller to the buyer so that he has them when that lease expires.
Yeah, and also if, let's say that the lease term does end at that point in time, but in the contract it says that they have to give a 60-day notice if they're going to cancel the lease, or it automatically extends for a certain amount of time, you need to know that stuff so that your client can make an educated decision about what they're really getting into.
Okay. Now, price and terms. Price, that's what you're working with your seller to determine what you're going to list the price for. Financing terms, always check cash and conventional. VA and FHA is very dependent on the property itself. I strongly suggest come into the classes that Supreme teaches, and those are one of the things they'll be teaching you, is what's involved with an FHA loan and what type of properties are or are not eligible for FHA. Seller financing, ignore it. Assumption of mortgage, ignore it. You can basically just skip over that whole paragraph.
If you have somebody who wants to do that, that's a conversation you need to bring to Richard or I so we can actually help you through it the right way.
If somebody is doing seller financing, the only time I've ever heard of it is with very high-end properties, in which case the seller is holding paper for the buyer. It will involve attorneys and accountants on both of their behalfs. We're not really involved in that. So I'm telling you, don't get involved with it. Assumption of existing mortgages. Okay? The only mortgages that have really been assumable for the last almost 30 years now have been VA loans. And I've never met a vet that has let their loan be assumed, because if they do, they lose that benefit going forward.
Well, FHA loans can also be assumed.
FHA loans are, and it's not really practical.
It's not, because what happens is there's a pretty big delta between the amount that you would be assuming and the amount you would still need to pay off, and most people aren't able to make that big payment or secure a second lien for that amount. So in most of those cases, it makes more sense for them to just get a whole new loan for the whole thing.
Okay. All right, next paragraph, seller expenses. This is one of the changes that was made. That line was always in there, but what they've included, it now says seller will pay mortgage discount, other closing costs, or concessions not to exceed X%, or any other expenses seller agrees to pay in a transaction. The reason they put this in there is if you have a seller that's agreeing to pay a concession to the buyer's agent, or whether they're willing to pay points to buy down a mortgage. I look at this and I'm going, why would I have my seller agree to this ahead of time before it's ever asked for?
Yeah.
So I suggest you leave this blank.
And you've got to remember, concessions are always up to the buyer on how they're going to use them. If you're offering concessions, the buyer gets to decide how they're going to use that concession.
Okay. Excuse me. Broker's obligations. Simple enough. We're making diligent and continued efforts to sell the property until the property goes pending. And even then, your job's not over. This is another line that they've changed slightly. And my opinion, this is going to open up all kinds of problems out there, guys. This includes, except when not in the seller's best interests, cooperating and communicating with other brokers. What? Yeah. So you call up another broker to show their property, and if you've ever had a run-in with that broker, he could very well say, you know what, my seller has said they're denying that showing because they don't want to work with you.
In which case, if you are the listing agent and you choose to do that, you need to take a real strong look at yourself and determine what kind of lawsuit you're ready to have, because your responsibility is always to help your seller get the most amount of money in the shortest amount of time for their property. So if you choose to let ego come into this, just be okay with sitting in front of a judge and explaining why you chose to do that.
There are a whole lot of instances that can cross lines that should never be crossed because of that. And I don't ever want to hear that you guys are turning down showings using that
So
paragraph.
basically, that's saying, quote unquote, as you said, opening the can of worms, that if we as the agent feel it's not in their best interest,
Yep.
as opposed to the seller thinking it's not in their best interest?
That's exactly what it says,
Yep.
Bob.
So Bob, there are brokerages out there I detest. Every time an agent does a deal with one of those brokerages, it turns into a problem.
Some of them are local.
Yeah, oh yeah, yeah, you know who I'm talking about. And my reaction would be, why do we even want to deal with these people? Just move on to somebody else. However, your job is representing your seller, getting them the best offer. We'll deal with it.
Yeah.
Okay.
In my opinion, this sentence in here will not last past the next iteration of the contract.
Yep.
This is a short-term sentence that is in here. How they ever agreed to putting this in there, I don't know.
Yep. Yeah, the first two lines have always been here.
Yeah.
It's this, when not in the seller's best interest, is what will be discussed in the future.
They got a problem with a KW agent because with KW and they have a small boutique, like I said, they just don't want to show you the property.
There's nothing that says exactly when they can or cannot choose to do that. It is up to their discretion, which is, there's a
Yeah.
big problem with this sentence.
Yeah, and that's all we're.
This is a line of BS,
Yes.
basically, that was put in here.
Yes.
Correct.
Okay.
Understand, guys, that all of these forms from the state are written by a room full of attorneys who can't agree on shit between them, and then you throw in some of the brokers from around the state giving their opinion with it, and that's why it takes so long for these forms ever to be changed, and why there are so many things in here that I strongly believe that by the end of this year, you're going to see a whole nother set of forms with revisions in them because people are finding out what the practicalities are.
All right, let's go
Now,
to Emma.
not going into it in any detail, we are working on customized forms right now for Keller Williams in this area, that some of this stuff is no longer in there. We're working with other offices in this area, and once we work through the process, we will then roll it out. In the meantime, you need to know this, because this is what you're using now.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, let's go to
Next one.
MLS.
Multiple listing service. Simply says you're placing the property in the MLS. It's beneficial to the seller because the property will be exposed to a large number of potential buyers. We are obligated to enter the property in the MLS within 1 business day of marketing the property to the public. If you don't, you might very well be reported. Now that means, putting a sign in the yard. It means sending out an email, creating flyers that you're handing out to people. Anything that's considered marketing the property, you need to put it in the MLS once you take the listing, which is one of the reasons that they have the coming soon status. If it's not ready to be shown for 2 weeks or 3 weeks, you put it into coming soon status, you can market the heck out of the property, and you're still under the obligations of the MLS. All right, so seller's authorizing us, market the property to the public, just talked about that. Place appropriate transaction signs on the property. Do not check the box. Do not check the box. Do not check the box. Do not initial. Do not. All right. This is basically saying you're going to use the seller's name to market the property. Why?
This was Shaquille O'Neal's house.
Yeah.
In high-end luxury instances, that may make sense if you're selling Michael Jordan's house down on the water in Miami and he gives you permission to be able to advertise that it was his home. Sure, great.
If he gives you
If
permission.
he gives you permission.
Line 59, display the property on the internet except the street address. Who in their right mind is going to look at a property if they don't know where it's located? Do not check that box.
Does that really happen that often?
Never, as far as I know. Makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. Next one, not to market publicly. Seller does not authorize the broker to display the property on the internet, which the seller understands there will be no for sale sign on it. You can't market it anywhere. You can't do anything with it. The only time you initial here is if you check that box, which basically, to paraphrase what this says, I'm an idiot, but I want to do it anyways.
Yeah, I understand I have drastically decreased my likeliness of selling my property, and I am okay with that. That's what you're getting them to initial.
Okay. C, obtain information relating to the present mortgage on the property. When you're at your listing presentation, again, one of your conversations with the seller is, when we go to contract, the title company will need all of your mortgage information. Can you please provide that to me now so I have it ready to go? Well, what do they need that for? Well, they need to find out who your mortgage is with so they can arrange for the payoff. Or B, if your property is paid off and is free and clear, we have the verification of that it has been cleared. D, I've never gotten that one, and it's still in there. We don't provide CMAs to the buyers. We're representing the seller. The buyer's agent gets to provide that to them. Not a big deal.
Well, they're giving you permission to provide it if asked. Why you would want to do that? Unless it's an appraisal situation, then you may want to be able to provide that. But
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So paragraph E, line 69. Use the lockbox system to show and access the property. The lockbox does not ensure the property's security. Seller is advised to secure or remove valuables. The seller agrees the lockbox is for their benefit, and they're releasing the broker and everybody working through the broker with any liability or responsibility, connection, or damage that occurs. I suggest you check that box and you learn the scripts and dialogues about why you want to put a, now I'm talking about the electronic Supra lockbox, not a combination lockbox. I hope none of you ever use a combination lockbox on a property. I could literally take my shoe off and hit that thing and pop it open to get access to the house. The electronic lockboxes are much more secure. The only people that can access it are licensed realtors. So you've got the security behind that. Guys, there's a whole lot of scripts and dialogues and reasons why you want to use a lockbox. Okay? Come into scripts and dialogues classes, go over that. However, never lose a listing because you're insisting too hard on a lockbox.
Yeah, and you got to remember, and one of the reasons for this is because especially if you have people coming from, let's say, New York City, they lived in Manhattan, and they're moving down here to South Florida. In Manhattan, lockboxes do not exist because the listing agent is also required to be present at every single showing. So make sure that you explain it based upon how we do real estate here, because they may be coming from a place where we didn't do lockboxes, and that's not a thing.
Yep. However, even in LA with the multi-million-dollar properties,
They have lockboxes.
they're on lockboxes.
Yes, they are.
So somebody who's going, I don't want to put I don't want people coming into my house unless you're here. Guys, you need to learn the dialogues to have with them. And here's a great example for you. Jenny talked at the meeting this morning. She's got 14 listings.
16.
16. What do you think Jenny's life would look like if she did not have lockboxes on all of those listings?
She wouldn't have a life.
She wouldn't have a life. She would be spending her day driving from showing to showing to showing to showing and have no time in her life for prospecting or working with buyers.
Yeah. And she's got an electric vehicle, so she'd just be on the side of the road dead.
Yes. All right. Check the box that says withhold verbal offers. A verbal offer is not worth the paper it's not written on. Verbal offers are not enforceable.
Correct.
And most of the time you'll get a phone call from somebody who says, I have a client, they would like to offer X on the property. It's always a ridiculous offer that would never be accepted. Why would you want to waste your time doing that?
Hey,
if you
Mr.
say,
Buyer, I appreciate that. Put it on some paper and send it on over. We'll
my
present it.
seller has instructed me not to take verbal offers. Please put it in writing, send it over. I'll be happy to present it. You'll find out real quick how serious they are.
Yeah.
Second box, do not check that box. By checking that box, you're withholding offers once you've gone under contract. You should always maintain the ability to take backup offers.
Correct.
With the problems in today's market, with appraisals, inspection contingencies, take backup offers.
Yeah, so do not check withhold all offers once seller accepts a sales contract for the property.
Okay.
You should still be presenting those offers.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Act as a single agent as seller with the consent to transition to transaction broker. We'll be getting into that a whole lot more in just a couple of minutes. Virtual office websites, for the most part, don't exist anymore. However, this is a great time to explain to them why you are not checking the next box. Virtual office websites, Redfin was actually the company that started with it. If you had gone to Redfin's website 10 years ago, you would check a box that was basically saying Redfin was representing you as a client. If you checked that box, you had the ability to do a much more robust search for homes than if it was just a simple IDX search.
Yep.
However, everybody can search everything these days, so that's really irrelevant. This box here, seller does not authorize an automated estimate of market value of the listing. What does that sound like?
It's an estimate.
It's his estimate. Okay? If you check that box, your listing will not upload to Zillow, Trulia, or any other website that does estimated market values. Those are your biggest websites. Now, when I said you get a phone call to go on a listing appointment, first thing you do is pull up the tax records. The second thing you do, go to Zillow, put in the street address, and see what Zillow comes up with for its estimate. Why do I suggest that? A, because Zillow is always wrong, but B, I'll guarantee you your seller has already done it. How do I know that? Because I'd be willing to bet that every one of you has been on Zillow to see what your house is worth.
Allegedly.
Not accurate, is it?
Allegedly what your house is worth.
Yeah, it's not accurate.
And Spencer Raskoff, by the way, who founded Zillow, his house sold for, I think it was $400,000 below what his Zillow estimate was. Yeah.
This was actually probably 6+ years ago. Gail and I were at a small convention in Bellevue, Washington, which is where Robert Redfin, who owns Zillow, lives. He had his house on the market for $24 million. It sold for 20. If the guy that owns the company can't get it right for his own house, what makes you think he's going to get it right for anybody?
Exactly.
Now, here's the way to explain it to people. What these companies do is they basically take the address on the property, put a pin in that property, draw a diameter circle around it. They take every property that's sold within that circle, divides it by the square footage of that property, comes up with $1 per square foot. They then multiply that times the square footage of your listing. Not real accurate, is it? Because one of those homes might be totally renovated in the last month or two. Another home is in original condition, not the same value. One of the homes could have a beautiful resort-style pool patio area. The other one doesn't. Affects $1 per square foot. One of them could back to a road, the other one's on a really nice interior lot. Guys, that's what you do as real estate professionals. Yep. You come up with the variations as to why one property is priced for what it is versus another. Another great example for you, go into a condo. You know that everything in a stack is exactly the same floor plan. But is the unit on the second floor worth the same thing as the unit on the 23rd floor? No. Within a condo, every floor you go up, the value increases. And then you add condition, looks, everything else into it to get variation of prices. You need to know this, how to explain it to a seller. So you're going on a listing appointment for $600,000 and Zillow saying it's worth $650,000. What do you think the seller wants to list it for? Well, Zillow says 650. Yeah, that's true. Let me explain to you why that's not correct. On the other hand, Zillow might say it's 550, and you're going, no, you can get six and a quarter for it. Let me explain why. This makes you the expert when you can explain to them why something like Zillow, which is widely accepted as the expert in real estate, they're not.
They gave themselves that title on their own.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
All right, let's go to
All
7.
right. Okay, number 83. Reason that I say check that box is because I don't want anybody making online comments about my property. I call that Yelp or Open Table for real estate. And I know you've all decided not to go to a restaurant because you read an online review. Well, that person could have been in a really crappy mood that day, or had the one waiter that was having a crappy mood that day.
Yeah.
So don't let anybody write online reviews about your property. All right, seller's obligations. They're going to cooperate with us, carrying out the agreement, including referring immediately to the broker all inquiries regarding the property's transfer. Mr. Seller, I know you're going to go to work tomorrow and you're going to tell everybody you work with, or you're going to go to church or the synagogue on Saturday or Sunday, and you're going to be telling everybody your house is on the market. If there's anybody that comes back to you asking you questions about it, please give them my card and have them call me. Reason for it, you are personally attached to that house. This is my job. It's not yours. You're hiring me to take care of all those inquiries so I can help move them along in the best way possible to help you find a buyer.
Yep.
Okay? Recognized broker may be subject to additional MLS obligations. Provide us with keys to the property, make the property available to show. Inform the broker before you take out a second mortgage or lease the property or do anything else to encumber it, because that will make it very difficult to sell. You're indemnifying us, holding us harmless from losses, damages, costs, etc., from liability to any person broker incurs because of seller's negligence, representations, misrepresentations, actions, or inactions. Mr. and Mrs. Seller, this is your home. And as an example, if somebody trips on that broken stone on your sidewalk coming up to your house and hurts themselves, not only are they going to sue you, but they're probably going to sue the brokerage. Well, it's not the brokerage sidewalk, it's yours. You're indemnifying the broker. If you tell a client that, oh, that empty lot next to your house is, that's just government land that's going to be empty forever, and the buyer finds out that that land is going to be built as a sewage treatment plant.
And you knew about it.
And you knew that that's what they were going to do, but you didn't tell me that, and you get sued, your problem, not mine. It was your misrepresentation. Number 2, use of the lockbox. We already talked about that. Number 3 is the existence of undisclosed material facts about the property. That's a seller's disclosure. We're going to talk about that in a short while as well. F simply says at closing there will be documents for you to sign regarding FERPTA. You're agreeing to sign those documents. G is your seller's disclosure. It's a very short paragraph on here. I suggest you write into this line simply see seller's disclosure.
Yeah.
As soon as we finish this document, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, the next document we're going to go after will be the seller's disclosure.
And the reason you don't want them to use this to disclose anything is because on the actual seller's disclosure itself, if there's certain things on there, they can simply say they do not know or unknown about the status of those things, and you can't cover everything you really need to in this one tiny little line.
Last 2 lines on here, H. Please consult with a professional if you have any questions outside of real estate. I am a real estate professional. I'm not an attorney, an accountant, an environmentalist. If you have any questions regarding those fields, please consult with a specialist there. All right, so
Too far.
Okay.
Am I missing
H.
a paragraph?
You're
Hold on.
bouncing. Nope. You're in. Okay.
Number 8.
There you go.
Hold on.
Brokerage relationship.
But we need number 8.
8 and 9.
8.
Eight,
Okay,
nine, 10.
nope,
Hold on. There we go.
okay. Page 3, paragraph 8. All right, this is the big change in these documents, is the compensation fields. And we're going to jump a little here. Okay? Paragraph 8, you're going to use A. Percent. This is your commission. This is 3 bananas.
Or mangoes, or whatever you decide.
Yes. Or, there's a mistake on that. This is $ or should be a percentage. Oh no, okay,
No,
I'm
that's
reading
right.
it. So this would be 3 bananas plus your transaction fee. Or a flat fee.
Yeah, so if you're choosing to
Okay.
take a listing at a flat fee, the or is what you'd fill out.
Yeah. 99% of the time, you are taking a percentage plus a transaction fee. B is if you're taking something that has an option on it, doesn't exist in residential real estate. And C is if you have a seller who's basically, you know it's an investment property, and they're saying, listen, I don't care whether you sell it or get a tenant for it, whatever comes first, you would fill this in with 10% of the gross value of the lease, and you're now protected to get paid whether they sell it or lease it. Okay. Our fee is due in the following circumstances. If any interest in the property is transferred, whether by sale, lease, exchange, governmental action, bankruptcy, or any other means of transfer, whether the buyer secured by seller, broker, or any other person. All right, problem with this, if the property is sold or changes hands, exchange, governmental action, or bankruptcy, do you think you're getting paid? No. And if an attorney reviews this, this is one of the lines an attorney tries to cross out. If they cross out that entire line, I will not accept it because that takes away your right to be paid. I have no problem with them crossing out the bottom 3. Okay? You don't even have to bring that to me if that's all they're crossing out. Anything more than that, bring to me, we'll
So
talk
when you
about
say the
it.
bottom 3, which ones are you specifically
Exchange,
talking
governmental action, or
about?
bankruptcy.
There you go.
Okay? Number 2, I'm going to break into 2 parts for you. If seller refuses or fails to sign an offer at the price and terms stated in this agreement, period. So you bring somebody a full price offer, and they said, nope, I'm not signing it. You think you get to collect a commission?
Yes.
No. Guys, you get to collect a commission when a property closes. I can't make it any simpler than that for you. Now, it says, fails to sign an offer at the price and terms stated in this agreement. Problem there is, what are the terms stated in this agreement? Other than the type of financing, there are none.
Yeah.
But somebody makes an offer, there's a whole lot of terms and conditions in there. And literally, in my opinion, is a buyer brings you a full price cash offer, they waive the inspections, they're waiving the appraisal, and they're going, Mr. Seller, you pick the closing date. So there's no reason for a seller to say, no, I'm not taking it. The seller still has the right to say, I'm not selling to that buyer. When they showed my house, they dragged mud into the kitchen, they kicked the cat, they left the door unlocked. I don't care what they offer me, I'm not selling them the house. A seller has a right to sell the house to whom they want under the terms and conditions they want. Now, the second part of this, if they default on an executed sales contract, or agree with the buyer to cancel an executed contract, we may decide to go after them. And that's a big may. If that ever happens, you call me or call Scott. We'll talk to you about it.
Yeah.
Your dialogue back to the seller is you want to be empathetic and say, I fully understand. Let me reach out to the other broker and see what the buyer has to say. But Mr. Seller, Ms. Seller, I strongly suggest you speak to an attorney, because what you are wanting to do is to break a legally binding contract. And the buyer does have legal remedies for that.
Based upon the contract.
My broker also has the right to collect the commissions due. You want to tell them what the reality is, and then you call, we have a conversation. So let me share a couple of stories with you here to really hit this home. Because if you decide you want to sue the seller to go after your commission, it's on your dime. I'm technically the one that has to sue them as the broker. I will sign whatever documents you want. You'll hire the attorney you want, and it's your dime.
Tell us about the broker.
We had an agent a couple of years back in one of my other offices who got really pissed off at his seller. Within a week of signing the offer, the seller called him up and said, we're canceling the deal. He actually said, if you or the other agent or an inspector or appraisal or anyone else steps foot on my property, we're going to let our dogs out on you. So my first question is, do you think there was something going on between the seller and our agent?
What did you do?
Yeah, but the seller's agent was as big as All Outdoors. He wanted to sue him. Well, to make a long story short, he spent $20,000 on attorney's fees. At the end of the day, they got a default judgment against the buyer, against the seller.
Because the seller
And
never showed up.
within a week, they had a letter from an attorney representing the seller said, if you pursue this, my seller will declare bankruptcy. Well, here's the other side of the story, which I don't believe his attorney told him. If that was a homesteaded property,
Can't go after it anyways.
can't go after him anyways. So he spent $20,000 on an attorney to get zero because his ego wouldn't let him go of it. Now, we've had other cases where agents have called me where there's been a commission issue going on. We know who the seller is. We know what businesses they own, that they own other properties. We've contacted our attorney who simply wrote a letter to the seller stating, this is what your agreement says, you owe a commission, and we've gotten paid. So depending on the circumstances, we'll talk about it.
Yep.
Next one here, number 3, if within 90 is commonplace, a lot of our agents put 180 days after the termination date. The seller goes to contract with a buyer that either you or another agent brought to their house, we get paid.
Only if
Unless they've relisted the house with somebody else. Now, Mr. Buyer, Mr. Seller, sorry, I know this is not something that applies to you. However, this is in our agreements because unfortunately it has happened in the past where, you know, a couple weeks before a listing expires, the seller gets together and go, hey, Mr. Buyer, you know what, my listing expires in a couple weeks. Why don't you come back then? We can save the commission. Well, if either of the agents find out about that, they will come after the seller to sue him for it. I know you're not going to do that, but that's the reason it's in here. Correct. And it's also built in here is that if we do show the house to somebody and the listing expires and you relist with somebody else, I'm totally out of the picture. That new agent is the one that will deal with the transaction.
As soon as they sign a new agreement, that protection period ends.
Retained deposits is simply saying if there's an escrow dispute because a contract falls apart, it used to be a default of 50%. I've always taught you just put 0 in there. I'll still teach you, put 0 in there. See, Mr. Seller, unlike a whole lot of other agents out there that try and claim 50% of that escrow, I believe that I get paid when I sell your home. If the deal does fall apart and you retain the escrow, I believe that money goes to you. You're the one that made the mortgage payment, the insurance, the taxes, all the maintenance on your house. You deserve that money. And if that does happen, I'm just asking one thing of you. I want you to tell your family, your friends, and your coworkers how I always look after the best interest of my client. Is that fair enough? Guys, go after the repeat and referral business instead of the short-term money.
Yep.
You'll end up further ahead of the game. Yeah, brokerage commissions, not set by law, fully negotiable. This is one of the statements in the settlement that is on almost every document that you'll be working with from
It was
now
super
on.
nice of them to put 129 lines into the contract instead of at the beginning, but hey.
Yep. I expect to see that changed.
Yeah, I do too.
All right, so notice the seller regarding buyer brokers. This is all new as well. Buyer's broker, even if compensated by seller or broker, will provide services for the buyer. Seller is advised and aware that seller may, but is not required to, compensation a buyer's broker upon closing. Seller might choose to enter into a separate written agreement to pay buyer's broker, or may approve broker to pay buyer's broker in accordance with paragraph 10. Okay, we'll get into paragraph 10 in a second. So this is just explaining what a buyer's broker is, and the broker may receive separate compensation from buyer for services rendered to buyer by broker. What does all that mean? Well, paragraph 10, there's 3 parts to it. Part A, seller authorizes their broker to pay the buyer's broker X commission. Now, if you're paying out 3 bananas to the buyer's, to the buyer's broker, go back up to paragraph 8, this is going to be 6 bananas. That's the total commission.
Now,
Okay? Now,
we don't
if-
believe that's the right way to do it based upon
Okay.
everything that we
So-
understand about the lawsuit.
To go back to paragraph 10, what I want you to do going forward is use B. Seller authorizes broker to offer compensation to buyer's broker from seller. So, Mrs. Seller, there's really no difference from what it always used to be other than the new terminology. So this agreement is simply saying in A, you're paying my broker 3 bananas, and down here you're agreeing to pay the buyer's agent 3 bananas.
Or whatever
Well,
you
I don't
agree
want
to.
to pay them 3 bananas. I think we can get away with paying them 2 bananas. Not a problem, we'll put 2 bananas in here. However, you need to be aware that when that agent submits an offer to you, that offer might include you paying 3 bananas to them.
Which we can still negotiate,
It's all-
yet likely it will come across that way.
Okay.
Now, you may be looking and saying, what in the heck is the difference? This looks like the same old thing. It's important to realize that the lawsuit that happened in Missouri happened because there were sellers who claimed that they did not realize they were paying compensation to the buyer's agent. Well, in reality, they weren't ever paying compensation directly to the buyer's agent. They were paying compensation to the broker, and the broker decided to offer a portion of their compensation directly to the buyer. So this is the reason Richard and I feel so passionately about that, is because we want to make sure that under no circumstances a seller can come and say, you didn't tell me I was paying the buyer's broker. Okay, so that's why we feel passionately that the commission you are choosing to accept, whatever you've agreed upon with your seller, goes in 8A, and then the commission that your seller is choosing to pay the buyer's broker goes in 10B. So they have no questions about what their responsibilities are and to whom their responsibilities are to for compensation.
There is one of the nationwide brokerages out there, happens to be 3 initials, that their new listing agreement, paragraph 10 doesn't exist at all. It is simply their commission. Everything else will be negotiated when an offer is made. Our state has opted to go with this form. We're looking at changing it a little. 3 choices. Bottom one says no compensation will be offered. You know what? Still part of your offer. You know, as I suggested to you, B or C, every offer you make in additional terms, you write in there, buyer and seller agree that seller will pay Keller Williams Realty Consultants X% at closing. So not only do you have an agreement, and when you make an offer, there is the compensation of seller to buyer broker agreement. You will fill that out for your commission, and that goes with the offer. So you've got it in 2 different places that the seller is agreeing to pay you. Now, go back up there for just a sec, please. So if you're showing, not if, when you are showing a property, you're calling the listing agent and you want to show your property tomorrow afternoon at 2 o'clock. By the way, are there any offers of compensation? Is it from you or from the seller? If they had checked box A, that the broker is paying it to us.
It's one form.
You are then using the broker-to-broker compensation form, and you're sending that to them, and that's your verification that you are being paid that percent. Okay?
Mm-hmm. And if they say that it's the seller who's compensating the buyer's broker, it's a different form called the seller to buyer broker compensation form.
What's really the difference? Just for the sake of
The difference is
verbiage.
verbiage and clearly communicating who is responsible for paying what.
Bottom line is, there's no difference whatsoever. One of the new documents that is in DocuSign now is the seller/buyer's net sheet. Okay? You go on a listing appointment, you should have been using a net sheet showing the seller, here's all your costs. This is what title insurance, prorations, all this crap is going to be. Well, there are now 2 separate lines on it. One that says seller broker commission, and second one is buyer broker commission. So that they're clearly seeing number doesn't change any, it's just now broken into 2 parts.
Correct.
That's all of these forms are doing,
Yep.
is taking what was quite simple, one line saying total commission was this, and then it was between you and I as brokers to decide how we were splitting it. Now it's just making it really clear to the public as to how it's going to work.
At the end of the day, the government got involved to simplify it, and now we have 4 forms.
Something you did once before, doing all your classes of these, do you have another version of the cheat sheet once you're finished with all this?
We can do that.
Yeah.
So quick question. So our business model will be B, right? We're
Yes.
doing B. So we're using seller to broker, broker to broker.
That would be our preference,
Okay.
yes.
Those 2 documents are used if you're working with a buyer and you
Correct.
want to confirm your commission. Under this, and another agent's calling you to show your listing, you're letting them know the seller has agreed to offer X commission.
And you need to
They-
have one of those forms filled out
Yeah.
to guarantee you are compensated.
Yeah, they should then send over that form to you
To broker.
to have your seller sign at the same time they're signing the offer.
Got you.
Correct.
Now, there are it's moving away from this document for a little bit, because when that happens, both of those forms, broker to broker or seller to broker, both have modification forms. So if somebody sends over a form to you saying the seller is paying out 3%, and the seller's now looking at the offer, they're going, well, based on the amount they're offering me, I'm not paying the broker 3%, I'll pay him 2%. You're going to do a modification to that form and send it back to them showing them the 2%.
Yep, and at that point in time, you should also do an updated net sheet adjusting that for them as
Correct.
well. Now,
Correct.
here's what's important to remember about this. There are scripts and dialogues that you need to get familiar with on this. Richard almost said it verbatim without probably realizing he said the answer, or he said the exact script. But if somebody asks you what has, what's changed, it's not what has changed. It's not what they will end up paying that's changed. It's how they pay that has ultimately changed. The way that it's going to be split up is just changed a little bit differently, and it's the clearly defined way that people are compensated in a transaction. So at the end of the day, most of the time, there will be some cases where it's completely going to be changed, but the majority of the time, I really believe about 90 to 95% of the time, what they pay will not change. How they pay is just going to be a little bit different. Make sense? And there's scripts from Jeff Glover that I have on our website that you can download to get really good with how to handle these objections and how to handle these different dialogues that you need to get pretty good at.
Before we came into class, I was having a conversation with Beverly Shanahan, she role plays every single morning at 7:30 in the morning. She has a group of people, and every day it's somebody different they're role playing with. She said in the last 2 weeks, she has become so comfortable with all of the new dialogues.
Yeah.
That's all it is, Bob.
Yep.
It is, nothing has changed other than the conversations you're having with people.
All right, let's hop through
Go.
so we can finish this.
Single agency. As a single agency, Keller Williams Realty Consultants and its associates owe you the following duties. Okay. As I had said yesterday, this whole section, I firmly believe you need to make part of your listing presentation.
It's part of your value proposition.
Or your buyer presentation. And that's the main reason. This is a big part of your value proposition, because 95% of all the agents out there operate as transaction brokers. They're not representing their client, they're representing the transaction. And your client wants to hire you to represent them.
That'd be like hiring an attorney to just get you through court and not being dependent upon helping you to win your case. But hey, at the end of the day, we just got through court. Doesn't matter what we accomplished, but we're done.
Yep. All right, now, what does it mean? Well, everybody deals honestly and fairly. But as a single agent, as a fiduciary, which means I put your interests in front of mine, the next 4 things are the important ones. Loyalty means I work for you and you alone. I'm not working for both parties. That means that confidentiality, no matter what you tell me, stays with me. If I know somebody's selling their house because they're getting divorced, no one's going to find that out from me. If I find out somebody's selling their house because they have a terminal illness and they want to clean up their estate before something happens, no one's going to find that out from me. I will keep all of that personal.
You have a duty.
Forever.
You have a duty to not disclose that.
Obedience. I will follow your directions as long as they do not break the law or my code of ethics. Which means that if you tell me you don't want me to bring any green people to your house, I can't follow that one. But if you tell me that you want me to sit an open house every single Sunday, I might try and talk you out of it, but if not, I am bound to follow your directions. Full disclosure means if I find out anything in this transaction that would affect your ability to negotiate, I am bound to share that with you. So if I find out that that the buyer that's looking at your house is moving here because of a job transfer,
And they had to
we're
be
going to
in
talk
by-
about that.
yeah.
Or they have to, they're looking in this neighborhood because they need to get their kid registered for school, and this is the school district they want to be in. We're going to talk about that because that enhances our negotiating power. Okay. The rest of this, accounting for all funds, skill, care, and diligence, preventing offers in a timely manner, disclosing all facts, that's standard with every realtor. Sign here and here. Now, consent to transition to transaction broker. You have to understand that my broker technically owns all contracts. That means that every agent in my office working under my broker is bound by the same thing. Now, we have 250 agents in our office, and if one of them brings the buyer to your home, my broker transitions to transaction brokerage. See, all of these things still apply except for those 4. What does it mean in reality? Well, it means I am still going to represent you to everything we talked about. It also means that the other agent in my office is going to represent the other agent to everything they talked
Their client.
about. And to the buyer. And we are simply not going to be sharing any of that information other than what's needed in order to get the transaction to closing. So I need you to sign here and here. So the transition is automatically built in. If that happens, you don't have to go back to them and have another document signed. It's all in the one document. Any questions about agency?
Okay.
Do you see
That really hasn't changed much at all.
It hasn't, no, that changed
changed,
not at all.
hasn't changed anything. But I want you to understand the power of single agency. I truly believe that as a professional, it's the only way you should be working.
Yep.
You're representing your client, whether it's a buyer or a seller. And the buyer-broker agreements are the same thing. Single agency, transition to transaction, for exactly the same reasons. You are representing them and their interests. And understand that, like I said, 95% of the people out there operate as transaction brokerage. So, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I don't know if you're interviewing other people about listing. This is in your presentation,
Yes.
not doing this. I don't know if you're interviewing other people out there. I just want you to be aware this is one of the big things you want to talk about.
And unfortunately, probably 90 to 95% of our people in our industry don't even know the difference between transaction and single agency.
Correct. Correct. All right, going on. Conditional termination. Seller calls you up. You know what, my job transfer fell through. I'm not selling. My wife and I have been looking around for where we want to move to. We can't find anything. We decided to take our house off the market. No problem. You're going to put a 0 in there. You see, Mr. Seller, I don't believe in charging somebody not to sell their house. If that does happen, there are only 2 things that I want from you at that time. First one, and most important, I want you to call me when you are ready to sell so I can finish doing my job. Fair enough? And B, I want you to tell your family, your friends, and your coworkers how I'm always looking after my client's best interests.
Yeah. And now remember, you are also running your own business. If you choose to put something in there like the fee for the photos that you put in there or something like that that's nominal, that's a business choice that you've made. Just make sure that you can articulate the value that you've brought through that entire transaction and up until that point so they understand that there are fees associated with it that you incurred. And like Richard, in almost every single case that I ever did when I was actively selling real estate, I didn't put anything there.
So do what's right by your client.
Yep.
Okay? Dispute resolution. My advice to you is no one initials these boxes.
Why?
That's in regard to binding arbitration. Okay? Binding arbitration, to me, is a win-lose scenario. If it goes to arbitration, you've got both parties standing up in front of some judge wannabe who's going to listen to both sides and going to make a ruling that one person wins and the other loses. And there is no appeal to binding arbitration. By not initialing that, parties are agreeing to go to mediation, and if mediation doesn't work, they get to go to court and sue each other, which is fine. This is one of those paragraphs that if an attorney is reviewing this for their client, they might very well try and cross out that entire paragraph. Let them. You don't even have to call me about that one. Because all the attorney wants to do, they want to go right to court and sue them. They don't want arbitration, they don't want mediation, they just want to be able to sue somebody. I don't care. There's not a court down here that I know of that you can get in front of a judge without having gone to mediation first.
Correct.
So doesn't
And
make
if
any
they
difference.
do go to court and they do sue one another, that gives them the ability to appeal the decision that was made and continue the process again if they didn't like the outcome that they received in it. Arbitration does not allow for that.
Okay, your last paragraph, basically tying everything up. This agreement is binding on sellers and brokers, heirs, personal representatives, blah, blah, blah. I just had this one come up. Broker may assign this agreement to another listing office. Their attorney had them cross that off, which I didn't have a problem with. I guess the reason that's in there is if we had this signed here and we closed up this office, I could simply move all the agreements over to one of our other
company.
offices.
Yep.
If they want to cross it off, go for it. This is the entire agreement. There's nothing outside of this. And signatures, initials, everything, facsimile, digital signatures are all agreed upon. Now, two things in additional terms that we want to talk about. Well, I'll go back. The biggest thing that I have historically seen over the years, an agent will put in there, using me as an example. If Richard Bass brings the buyer, total commission shall be X. If you're reducing your commission, if you're bringing the buyer. Okay. That's probably the number one thing I've always seen written in additional terms. Those of you that were at the team meeting this morning, you saw Supreme, you saw Title Alliance. There is no one better in the business than the two of them. They are your partners. They're part of your team. This is your value proposition in working with buyers or sellers. Are the people backing you up? You should write in here, seller instructs broker that all offers are accompanied by a pre-approval letter from Supreme Lending. We cannot dictate that the buyer has to use Supreme.
Nope.
That's called steering. However, the seller can insist that the buyer at least talk to them. The reasoning behind that is if they talk to Supreme and Brian or Lynn says, there ain't no way in hell these people are getting a mortgage, or based on the information they gave me, the maximum amount they can qualify for is this, and you're trying to sell something above that, why do you, A, want to finish negotiating with them, or B, ever go to contract with them knowing it'll never happen? Or I know there's a whole lot of you out there have gone to contract, and 2-3 weeks into it, you're hearing that their lender can't perform, or something happened. Well, you can now say, you know what, you've already spoken to Supreme, they already gave you a pre-approval, why don't we just move this back to them, and we can still get this closed in 7 days.
Yep.
Use it to your advantage and show your seller that you are in business with somebody that can help you ensure it's going to happen.
Yeah, because you got to remember, like the people that we have here in our office with Supreme and in all of our offices, I haven't had any experiences where they have pre-qualified and pre-approved somebody where they haven't been able to get it done, with the exception of the buyer themselves financially screwing something up and going and buying a boat or something like that that they shouldn't have during that process. So you can feel confident that you're going to have somebody who's well qualified and able to purchase the home. And like Richard said, you cannot dictate that they have to use those people, but if they choose to use someone else, like a launchpad mortgage or something like that they found online, at least they have a backup plan that they can go to, that you can still get the home closed with them having a pre-approval from somebody who you know, like, and trust. The words that my broker in Texas used when I was actively selling real estate is always work with a lender you can find and choke when things get tough. Because you want to be able to go and have those tough conversations when things aren't going the right way in a transaction.
Yep.
And then the second
Okay,
thing.
part one in here. You're in Broward County right now. You're generally selling homes in Broward County, where it has historically been that the buyers pick and pay for title. Okay. I put it yesterday. When you walk away from the closing table, what happens there makes or breaks your reputation, makes or breaks the referrals you will get from that client. And if you let someone else's title company handling the closing, you can pretty well be assured it will not be a smooth transaction. There is nothing that says you cannot, right in here, seller instructs broker that Title Alliance will handle the closing. So when somebody submits an offer to you and box B or C is checked, part of your counter offer is the seller has already stated that Title Alliance will handle the closing. Please check box A.
And tell them about.
Now, the seller has to pay for it in
Yeah.
that case. However, everything is negotiable. So if the buyer would normally pay for title and it would cost them $1,000, well, you know, Mr. Agent, your buyer's not having to pay for that, the seller is, so your buyer can actually afford to come up an extra $1,000 in their offer. Or come up $500, and it means they're splitting it.
Yeah.
If you control mortgage and you control title, I will guarantee you, you will have a stress-free transaction for your client.
Share with them real quick as we wrap up just the call that Title
Yeah.
Alliance got the other day from a $50 million producer from another company.
I've actually got to talk to you about that later, but I got a phone call from Bill O'Connell, who is now heading up Title Alliance. He says, I just needed to let you, this was like an 8:30 in the morning call, which I normally don't take. He says, I just had a phone call from a $50 million Compass agent who just closed a transaction with us. And he said, while I normally don't do this, he said, I had to call you, this is him calling Bill O'Connell, and tell you that the communications and the service I had from Title Alliance is the best I have ever had. I always give, because I deal with multi-million-dollar properties, I always give all of my closings to an attorney to handle. This is the best experience I've ever had. Guys, they're your partners. You know, as you hear Susan up here talking about, you know, what has to be done and how she can help you. I don't care whether it's, you know, your deal or someone else is doing it. If you have questions, go and ask them. They will help you out with it. But I can't tell you strong enough to make sure you put those two things into every listing agreement that you make.
I got one to come over to us now.
Any questions today?
Thank you.
Richard, for active listings, where they sign the old agreement,
Mm-hmm.